and we're going to talk to Scott here. Alrighty. Hey there, Scott. Thank you so much for waiting on hold. I understand you want to talk to us about compelling evidence for the soul.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. How you guys doing today?
Great, thanks. You're talking to Cynthia and Martin, by the way.
Hi, Scott. Nice to talk
Yeah,
with you.
Cynthia and Martin. Hey, Cynthia.
Hey.
Yeah, I called in basically in response to Ethan's made a remark on Facebook. You know, I follow Ethan on Facebook, and we're talking about compelling evidence for the soul. And just up front, I'll let you know that I am an atheist and I'm a skeptic. And I even I study a lot of epistemology, and I do street epistemology with people normally like once a week on a YouTube channel. And I do debates with theists and atheists, everybody in between about a range of topics.
Wow.
So just to kind of give you a short introduction and let you know where I'm coming from here.
Yeah,
I'm not really trying to argue for anyone to believe in the soul or not.
All right.
But it was just an interesting conversation because we're talking about compelling evidence and we're talking about the soul. So I would say that my position is that there is compelling evidence for the soul, and we can go from there.
All right. What is the compelling evidence?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay. Yeah. No doubt. So first of all, the soul, I would appeal to the researchers that where I'm basing all this stuff on. There's a researcher, his name is Sam Parnia. He's a cardiologist and professor at New York University, and he studies near-death experiences for a host of different reasons, not just for trying to prove the soul or anything like that, but for other reasons. But he says that there is evidence that some form of experience continues at least for a few moments after clinical death, when there should be no consciousness in the brain. You know, when you go through anesthesia, you know, gas.
Hey, Scott. Hey, Scott.
Blackout.
Hey, Scott. Sorry to cut you off, man. I definitely want you to continue, but if you're moving around at all, it is disrupting your cell signal. We aren't able to hear you, and I'm going to take this brief moment to say that if anybody is watching and wants to call, we do have open lines, so please give us a call. But Scott, I'm hoping we're able to keep listening to you, so go ahead and continue.
I know. I really hope I do. I'm sitting still, but I've been having a lot of issues.
Yeah, we can.
Reception here, but
okay, you're good now.
Yeah.
I'll stop you if we can't hear you, but please continue.
Yeah, please stop me if you can't hear me so we can be more coherent. But as I was saying, that, you know, under anesthesia, people black out. They have no experience. If the same brain functions stop during death, there's veridical experience. There's evidence for that. And so that's what Sam Parnia's research has led him to publish in papers, and it's been confirmed and things of that nature. Evidence is for me, it's going to be prediction power. So if someone can say, look, if this is the hypothesis, if the hypothesis is true, then this thing is going to happen by prediction. And if it happens, then that kind of counts as evidence for the hypothesis, right? And so Sam Parnia has set up predictions, different operating theater. And when a person, undergoes clinical death and then they resuscitate, they're able to identify the things in the room, conversations in the room, things of that nature, everything that he predicted. In some of those cases, not all of them, in enough cases to be compelling. So that's his evidence. Now, it doesn't mean that the soul lasts forever. Sam Parnia is an atheist, not religious. He just believes that whatever this thing is that we're calling the soul, something like a self or experience or consciousness, seems to linger on for at least a few minutes after clinical death when there should be no experience. That's as far as he goes. That's as far as I go. And I'll be honest with you, my own personal incredulity kind of rejects it. I just don't want to believe that that's the case for some reason. I just find it's kind of for me to believe. because
Yeah.
there's too much evidence that, you know.
Yeah, I hear you.
But
And that's the thing too is even like let's say we even grant that there is an intangible component to being alive. And you said you're an atheist, so I'm don't think that I'm trying to convince you of anything. I'm just saying it out loud. That
yep,
doesn't mean that there's any sort of being regulating those souls or placing them into bodies or determining purpose for them or anything like that. So even if there was compelling evidence for, in near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences for the soul, I am reading a little bit about Dr. Parnia in my side window here, but I didn't want to not listen to you, so I've mostly been listening. But
oh yeah,
but but yeah, I mean, I hear you. Let me ask you this. Let's say there is a soul to the description that Dr. Parnia has described, or to the that exists the way he describes it. Where do we go from
uh-huh.
there?
Where do we go with that? I don't know. I would just say that the evidence can only point to what it points to, which is that it seems that the evidence points to some form of selfhood lingering on sometime after the brain functions are gone, when consciousness shouldn't, go on. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's anything supernatural about it. It could just be some natural law or principle that we're unaware of. And I tend to believe that because I'm a naturalist. I believe that everything that has been solved, every mystery about the world that has been solved up to now has had a natural explanation for it. So if it happens to be true that there is a soul or there is some sort of lingering consciousness, at least even a few minutes after the brain dies, then there's a natural explanation for it. I don't see how that's possible, but if it is possible and we just don't have all the information to explain the full picture, I could accept it, but I would still think that there's some sort of nature behind it, that there's something natural about it. That's just my own personal incredulity at work, though.
Yeah, I just wanted to just go back to this term soul. See, this is this
Hmm.
is my this is my issue, is that, dependent on what belief system that we are dealing with to use terms like soul, the definition of soul can be different depending on where we are. Hindus call the soul prana, and prana was a Sanskrit word for breath. You know,
Hmm.
Christians take the soul as being your, depending on where in Christianity you are, that is your mind, will, and emotions that's attached to your spirit. And when you get to spirit, that even becomes even more nebulous. So the
Correct.
problem, so the issue with me specifically is that we don't really even have a handle on a good definition of what soul, quote unquote, air quotes that I'm doing right now, is. So now,
Hmm.
if we're now one of the things that I even saw, like and I pulled this up from Georgetown EDU in their bioethics portion, that Dr. Parnia said that there is thus the evidence thus far suggests that in the first few minutes after death, consciousness is not annihilated. But again, okay, consciousness, like, I have like consciousness now because I'm walking, I'm talking, what I'm saying, like I'm having a conversation with you. So, can we say that, that right now my consciousness is functioning? Sure, we'll go with that. But is that really a soul? Right? And
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
that's my issue that I'm battling with. And the
Yeah.
reason being is because, like, we just don't have a good foundation of, like, unequivocally a soul is X, Y, and Z. You know?
Right, right, right. I would definitely 100% agree with you that terms have to be defined by the person because, you know, words are not prescriptive, they're descriptive, right? And there's many
Hmm.
usages for words, like you just pointed out. So, in a general sense, the fact that many people, like, say, a Buddhist would say that the soul is that illusion of the self, like it's an illusion. There actually is no self, but this illusion is the soul, and it's
And guess
linked to
what? And
your
guess what,
being,
Scott?
right?
And guess what, Scott? And I didn't mean to cut you off, but I'm also
Hmm.
secular Buddhist. And
Right.
the Buddhism that I actually follow, we don't even believe in the soul. So,
Right. Exactly. That's what I'm getting at.
so
Yeah.
right, yeah, so that's going to change
Exactly.
too. Yeah, go ahead.
Exactly. Exactly. So it's like depending on who you ask, like that's why I say for some people there is compelling evidence for the soul. It depends on how you're defining the soul, though, and it also depends on what you find compelling, because all of these terms are subjective. Like
Right.
soul is a subjective term,
Yep.
compelling is subjective. Some people find this evidence not compelling at all. Some people
Mm,
think the theory of evolution is not compelling, believe it or
mm,
not.
right.
Some people do. Most
Yeah,
people
that's
do,
true.
hopefully. But and so what's compelling to one person may not be compelling to another for a host of reasons. All of this stuff is kind of subjective. But if you were to just ask, a general question, is there compelling evidence for the soul? I would say, well, technically, yeah. It doesn't mean that evidence means truth.
Hmm.
Evidence can be overturned by better evidence at any time. It's tentative. Um, so right now, according to the people who research this kind of stuff, and people I've researched are like Sam Parnia is a heading guy, they're leading guy in that area. There's other people as well. He's got partners. They're all kind of saying the same thing, but so what? They're a lot of these people are not religious. They're in fact they're atheists or agnostics. It doesn't really mean that it's true that God exists and that Jesus is the one who created the universe and all the souls in the universe. It doesn't mean any of that. It
Hmm.
just means that there's something going on that we have evidence for that we don't quite understand.
Right.
And some people define it as the soul. Some people are compelled by it. So that's my only point. It's really just an epistemic thing. I'm more concerned rather than whether that thing is true or not. I could care less whether there's a soul or not, to be honest. But I am kind of curious about what makes people believe what they do. Like, why are people compelled to say this is true or this is not true or whatever? And so, for example, I'll argue with theists, for example, in my debate groups or whatever. And they'll say, well, there's evidence, there's evidence for the soul, like Sam Parnia, this proves Christianity. And I'll just grant them, yeah, there's evidence for, what he's saying is true, that, there's consciousness after the brain dies for some time, right? But
Hmm.
that doesn't get you to God. It doesn't get you to Jesus. It doesn't get you to even souls, really, in every sense of the word, maybe in some aspects, but not in the Christian version, as far as I understand it.
Hmm.
So, it's just, for me, it's the epistemology that I'm interested in, though,
Hmm. Yeah, the asking of questions. Yeah, I hear you. And I think that that's kind of what, like when we look at stuff like this, those are the things that we should implore, like those particular tools, like the Socratic method of asking questions of, of what, when, how, why, all that other great stuff, just so that we can kind of get at what is the most portion of truth that we can get to, right? And
Yeah.
but at the same time, like and I think that you kind of like hit it on the head when you was like, compelling can mean something different to other people, and compelling doesn't necessarily mean fact. It just means that, that's interesting, maybe we need to look into that further. And I mean, like,
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind like reading more studies about, like, how consciousness is lingering after clinical death. And because, like, another thing to consider is that, these are people who were pronounced dead. That doesn't necessarily mean that they were completely finite, about to go into the grave, right?
Right.
Yeah. So
Hmm.
that,
Hmm.
so that
That's another word. Yeah.
yeah, so that's something that, one has to consider as well before we start to shoehorn in, that means that we have souls, and that means that this soul is going to go to heaven, or that means that soul is going to go to hell, or
Hmm.
if you're Catholic, they're going to purgatory, right? So those,
Exactly.
yeah, so I mean, I think,
Exactly. You got it.
yeah, yeah,
You're exactly right. That's
it's,
exactly right.
yeah,
Death is defined by Parnia as clinical death, meaning that he's a cardiologist. So
right,
Right.
he is talking about cardiac arrest. So when
Yeah,
right,
they
not brain death.
pronounce you dead at a particular quantifier,
mm-hmm,
and that doesn't mean that death isn't a process. It's absolutely a process. It could be a matter of the brain just dying down. Each part of the brain is slowly dying down. You could probably be conscious in some form for hours, he said, because the brain is slowly dying down. But it might teach us a lot about the brain. It might teach us a lot about the nature of consciousness, like how it unifies. How can it continue to be unified if the brain, parts of the brain are quieting down, like say with hallucinogens, for example. People have rich experiences when most of the brain is shut down, which is kind of odd. It's kind of against, epiphenomenalism and things like that. So there's a lot of questions, and it doesn't mean anything supernatural. It just means we're growing in knowledge about the material world that we live in. And I think it's fascinating,
Yeah, I agree. And especially since like you even think about the brain itself, even though like we've mapped like different functionalities of the brain, there's still so much we don't know about that one organ that's been in our bodies for as long as we can know, you know? So, yeah, so like I think that a lot of times, especially like when these studies come out from different, scientists and doctors that study this stuff, it is fascinating. It definitely is fascinating. And I would definitely, and to your point, like, it may just be like another uncovering of like functionality of the brain that we may not have been privy to in the past.
And the study of consciousness has really ramped up since the mid 90s. So it's pretty new. And ever since, Professor Crick and, Chris Koch and all of these people that are big neuroscientists and philosophers of mind and people like this, and they've actually termed it the hard problem of consciousness, because they can't definitively say that how the brain produces consciousness. If it does, obviously they think it probably does, because it's so tightly correlated. You drink alcohol, you take drugs, it does affect your experience. But there's more to it. It could be that consciousness is not just the brain, but it's also the information that you're taking in from your environment. All of that stuff kind of comes together like a brain in a vat. We laugh about the brain in the vat situation, but actually they say if you put a brain in a vat, because there's no stimulation, there is no consciousness. There's nothing for it to be conscious of, right? So consciousness is kind of dependent on the information that it's taking in and that the brain kind of deciphers and filters out and stuff like that. So that affects the quality of what you're experiencing and even gives you an experience. So there's a lot of mysteries to that. Like, why is that the case? What is it about a neuron? It's almost like, the hardware of the brain and the neurons and all of that stuff. We're talking about that stuff like it's just biochemical, electrical responses and things like that. But that's kind of like one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin is this rich experience that, when you think of, your loved one, you're not thinking of neurons firing in your brain. You're thinking of the face of your kids or a memory or something like that. And that's like a rich experience that goes hand in hand with that firing. That's a mystery. Why should that be the case? Why should atoms get together and create this rich 3D tactile stereo experience? Like, why should that even be the case?
Because atoms love to party. How about that?
Yeah, I went to college with a guy named Adam. He was pretty wild. Hey,
That's right.
Scott, as fascinating as this conversation is, we do have another couple callers on the line here. So I just want to kind of wind things down. But thank you so much for calling in and sharing what you have to say. It was way different than what I expected based on the notes. Different in a pleasant, enlightening way. So thank you. I really appreciate you calling in tonight.
Nice.
Likewise.
Perfect. Thank you guys for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And keep reading up on that. And if you find out anything else, call us back. Even if it's not me and Cynthia here, the audience definitely wants to hear more about this kind of stuff, because this is the edge of what I would believe it to call supernatural. I'm not saying that the soul is real and the soul is supernatural, but this is the edge of all of that. And so if we actually did discover something like that, I think that would be absolutely amazing, and I'd love to hear about it. But until that discovery
Awesome.
is firm, of course, we're going to remain skeptical. Oh, Ethan is reminding me
That's
real
right.
quick. So at the beginning of the call, you mentioned that you were a content creator. We're just going to give you a brief moment to plug whatever it is you do.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Thank you very much. I
Yeah.
host a show every Friday at 7 p.m. Central called Exploring Epistemology. So I talk to atheists, theists of all stripes, political people. We talk about whatever their fondest beliefs are, and we just explore their epistemology and how they came to believe those things. It's on the Board Skeptic channel, and it's Exploring Epistemology with Scott Williamson, and it's at 7 Central on Fridays.
All right. Sounds great, man. Thank you again for calling in and have a great night, all right?
Thank you, Scott. We appreciate it so much.